Welcome to Heaven Awaits. I'm Lee and I share real near-death experiences submitted to NDERF and IANS. Today's story comes from a 17-year-old scuba diver who had a near-death experience during a dive in 1972. By accident, I ended up on the NDERF website, never really knowing that one existed for this subject, but not unaware of the term NDE. Having had my own NDE, and then reading what your members have experienced or what you say could comprise an NDE, well, I was taken quite aback. So much so, I have decided to share my NDE with your group. I have shared this story with others over the years, but only after knowing them well. I was always afraid of what others might say or think, but after visiting the site, I feel I should share it, in hopes that others may come forward and not hide such a wonderful experience from the world and themselves. I would be very open to any kind of verification, at least to some of the things I have written here, up to, and including hypnosis. Something I have always wanted to do, but don't seem to make the time. Suggestions with that in mind are truly welcomed. If you know of a good hypnotist that does these kinds of things, please send me their contact info. I still live in the Los Angeles area. I was 17 years old and had completed a scuba diving program back in 1972 and had been diving with a couple of high school friends on a not-to-regular basis. The beach we dove at was located in Corona del Mar, California. That day, as I left to go diving, my mother was really worried as she asked me not to go diving and, in fact, asked me to give up the whole hobby. Of course, being 17 makes you immortal, so I just said, "Okay, Mom, don't worry." Our dive began like all the other ones. We were cautious, didn't really dive in more than 20 to 60 feet of water, and there was always three of us, Richard, Ricky, and me. I noticed that my primary oxygen had failed since I could not suck any air out of my regulator. I struggled with it, but gave up. It wasn't an issue since we were in about 40 feet of water and I had my air reserve valve. I pulled on the wire that led to the reserve, took a big hit of air, and on my second breath, no air, my reserve had failed. Actually, I couldn't tell you today if it was the air or the regulator that had malfunctioned. By no means was I an expert scuba diver then or now. Because of the problem with the primary air supply, I had fallen back behind Richard and Ricky, so now I began to become afraid. I had already let the air go from my lungs, so I had no air now, and a free ascent without any air in my lungs didn't look like a good option. This free ascent thing was my weakest point in my diving certification, which was duly noted in my final exam. I tried to get Richard and Ricky's attention, but they didn't respond to me. The truth be told, we had all been fooling around with each other, and so they must have thought I was trying to get them near for another round of slapping each other's mask off. I gave them the underwater sign for out of air. They responded with their middle fingers, and I just floated there helplessly hoping they would come over and give me some air. They didn't come, and now I was just focusing on trying to keep my regulator in my mouth before losing my consciousness. I could tell the moment of blacking out was quickly approaching, and I started to get really worried and afraid that this was it for me at the young age of 17, with so much yet to live for. Now I was really scared, and I thought about how disappointed my parents would be, especially my mom. She never liked the whole scuba diving thing, and on this day actually gave me some grief about diving. Over the years, I come to understand and respect the very close psychic bond I have with my mother. Just before I blacked out, I remember how afraid and worried I was, but just milliseconds before I did black out, this feeling of euphoria came over me. I felt no fear, no pain, nothing. I actually felt happy and free. It was really weird. Then I am above the beach, looking down at the area where our gear was, our ice chest, and personal belongings. I could look out onto the water and see our diving buoy out there beyond the breakers. I knew Richard and Ricky were still underwater. I felt very much alive and very much intact. The only thing missing was my diving equipment, which immediately led me to worry because we rented it and we had to pay for it if something went wrong. But every time I worried about anything, this calmness would take over, and then I would become worry-free. To this day, I hate heights, so my attention immediately went from losing my diving gear to how I was able to fly and float. Once again, that calmness took over, the same calmness that I felt just before I lost my consciousness. I started to look around, and I noticed that I was moving in a northwest direction, and now I really began to pay very strict attention to what was happening to me. I couldn't tell you if I were whole or spirit or anything like that. I felt whole, and with my physical body, I had on my diving watch. I actually began to notice that I could control my movement in flight and actually stop myself when I concentrated on stopping. If I stopped too long, I would begin to vibrate really badly. With my fear of heights, I thought I would fall out of the sky. When I stopped concentrating on being stopped, I would again begin to move as if someone or something were in charge. I felt carefree and worry-free, but to a very extreme degree. Every time I got scared, it was immediately replaced by total happiness. It was an awesome feeling. I noticed that the direction I was traveling in would eventually take me back to my city. I remember clearly floating over Disneyland and the Knott's Berry Farm. It was very strange. I had the distinct feeling I was being guided by an unseen force. I could not see anyone, just the ground and the sky to the horizon. I decided to measure the amount of distance I traveled by, measuring the distance with my eyes between features on the ground. Then use my watch to time the distances traveled by the second hand on my watch. I don't know why I did this. I remember the feeling just came to me, and it seemed like a practical thing to do considering what was happening. Of course, this would have been a very imprecise measurement, but it just seemed to be the thing to do. Well, it didn't take long for me to realize that I couldn't really eyeball the ground accurately for distance measurements, so I became frustrated over time with the process. However, before I gave up on the project, I did observe, and intuitively, I could really feel it inside. Very strong feeling. Concluded the following. At one point, I noticed just by luck that while I was trying to eyeball distances by looking at ground features and timing them with my watch, I noticed that my watch always remained the same, ticking off seconds, linear. But the distance on the ground did not remain constant. It varied from unequal distances. Some repeating, some not repeating. My speed was not linear. It varied, but my watch did not. So that deep intuition that seemed to be with me throughout this whole experience led me to believe something was really wrong. I tried to be scared, but I couldn't. It just wouldn't take hold. And I wasn't very surprised when I entered the city I live in from the southeast. After all, this was the heading I had been on since I left the beach. I finally ended up floating above my home, wanting so very bad to just drop down and walk in, but I couldn't. I did stop myself since I had been practicing that since I began the journey. There I was floating above my home. I could feel my mother's presence in the kitchen. I could sense exactly where she stood. I could sense she had become overwhelmed with grief and was very worried about something, but I could not figure out why. I began to vibrate again, and for fear of falling out of the sky and through the roof of my house, I relaxed, and once again, I began moving. I now observed that my course from the beach changed from a northwest direction to a more northerly direction, and just a tad east. I had been paying very close attention to this entire experience, feeling it, observing it, making sure I remember the details that I have shared here. I took one look at the new direction, and I could see Rose Hill Cemetery in Whittier, California. Since I was airborne, I instinctively felt that I would be crossing over the cemetery if I remained on this new course heading. I soon entered the cemetery from the south. I was surprised when I was stopped by some unseen force. Until then, all the stops had been initiated by me when I concentrated on stopping. At least that is how I felt about it, again with a very strong intuition that I was correct in these thoughts and assumptions. As I looked down, I could clearly see that I was above my family's burial plots, which were already occupied by my late grandfather and great-grandmother. There were other burial plots that were empty, but also belonged to my family. Out of nowhere, a voice said to me, "What do you think about what is going on down there?" Out on the horizon, just in front of me, was this man. Just his head appeared. He looked Hispanic with this giant mustache. He spoke to me. and I could see his mouth move. He was fading in and out of visibility, sometimes transparent, then semi-transparent, then almost solid, but never really solid. I had the intuition that he was the one guiding me and protecting from falling out of the sky on my journey from the beach, then to my house, and then to the cemetery. I have over the years come to call him the guide. He once again said, "What do you think about what is going on down there?" So I looked down again, and I didn't expect to see anything new, since I had been looking down at the family graves for what I thought was a long time anyway, before the guide appeared and started talking to me. When I looked this time, there was a funeral going on down there, but this funeral below wasn't there a second ago, and that I knew that for sure. I was too high in the sky to really make out what was going on down below me. I knew it was a funeral because I could see the casket, but I could not make out any people. It was the first time I had seen people on the ground during the whole journey. I turned to the guide and said, "Can you get me any closer so I can see the people better?" He kindly responded with, "No," which forced me to look back down and try to figure this out by myself. I clearly remember focusing on the people standing closest to the casket when a woman who was being held by a man breaks loose of his grip. She literally threw herself onto the casket, and in English and Spanish said the kinds of things a mother would say when her only son dies at the age of 17. The whole experience now became so very somber, so very real. I tried to be really disappointed, in shock, but I just couldn't get sad or worried, which helped me tremendously, as I would have freaked out if I could. But I couldn't. I looked at the guide and said, "That is my funeral, isn't it?" He responded with, "Yes." I looked down again, and now I could see my friends and the cars of those times. Many friends were there. My mom and dad were near my casket. My little sister and her boyfriend also stood near my casket. My girlfriend, who I would later marry, was also standing close by. If I could have become depressed, I would have, but I could not feel any misery, hate, pain, fear, nothing. Everything was just okay no matter what I saw or felt. If we could all feel like that in this world, it would be a very special world. The guide then said to me, "You have to decide if you want to go or come with us." But I was too busy trying to feel something about my own funeral, and I couldn't feel anything. The guide once again said, "You have to decide if you want to go or come with us." Not being able to feel any fear or anything didn't prevent me from being snippy with the guide, so I said to him, "You have said that twice now. You have used the word us twice, and it is just you and me here. What do you mean when you say us?" I said in a snippy voice. At that exact second, a land appears behind the guide, a beautiful land like no other I have ever seen in my life. I have traveled to many places here on Earth, but have yet to find a place where the plants and trees glowed like they did in this place. It was like a beautiful tropical jungle. I could see birds flying with 3 distinctly separated tails, not like the birds I had seen here on Earth. I could see plants and trees that made no sense to me. It was so beautiful, so peaceful, and very bright. Everything was bright and alive. By now, I was beginning to understand what is going on here. I know now it isn't anything earthly that I am looking at or for that matter experiencing. I began to make observations once again. I noticed that the second this land appears, it was separated by a deep canyon. The guide and I were on one side, and this tropical paradise was on the other side. To the degree I could get worried, I was concerned that I could feel this place calling my cells to cross the canyon. Actually, it felt more like my atoms were being pulled or attracted to this place. Instinct told me if I crossed the crevasse, I could not come back. Yet this place called my every being. I wanted to go there very badly, but I knew if I did, I couldn't come back. I thought of how this would affect my sister, my parents, my girlfriend, and my friends if I chose to cross. I thought about never being a father or having children. I was only 17, and I wanted to experience more of life. So I continued to concentrate on not letting one single atom or cell cross the divide that was before me. Yet I had this uneasy feeling that I belonged there, that I originated from there, that this place was my home, and that everything came from there, seen and unseen. I really wanted to be there, go there, but I knew there were consequences if I crossed the divide. My intuition during this entire experience was my only guide, and yet I always felt that I had been there before anyway. The guide said it again. You have to decide if you want to go or come with us. I looked at him and I said, why do you keep saying it is just the two of us here? At that second, from behind this magnificent land, a man walks down from the sky as if there were invisible stairs. I could see him taking steps downward, but he never really touched the ground. He seemed to float and never really came in contact with what I would have perceived to be the floor or ground. His movement in this way appeared to me as being not very natural, and I noticed that unlike my guide, he was solid. I could not see through him. While I struggled throughout this experience to fully understand it, figure things out, which I did very slowly, it didn't take me very long to figure out who just walked down from the sky. It was Jesus Christ, which these days I call the divinity figure, trying to keep it non-denominational. Well, I knew it was because I just knew it. He looked somewhat like all the pictures I had seen on Earth of him, but then not exactly like all the pictures. It is a pretty awesome feeling to be looking right at Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as he is known here on Earth. He was dressed in this long robe, which was blue. He was a slender man, or being much more handsome than ever depicted in his pictures on Earth. His hair was a loose, curly, golden blonde-haired person, kind of long but not too long. Just one look at him, and you felt like he was your family, your father. My cells and atoms wanted to fly right over there and hug him, but I knew if I crossed that canyon, it would be a pretty permanent journey. My instincts were what prevented me from crossing the canyon. Intuitively, I knew what would happen if I crossed. I wanted to keep my options open if there was any such thing. Many times over the last 33 years I have thought, if I had the chance again, I would jump at it. So many times I have thought, why didn't you go for it? Dude, you missed the journey of a lifetime. It is hard to describe, but it seemed like we just looked at each for what seemed to be hours. The first second I saw him, I knew he knew everything about me, my past, my present, my future. I had the feeling of being worthless, or maybe better said mundane. I could feel and sense there was nothing I could say to this being that he didn't already know. I could feel him inside my head. I could feel his thought just slightly ahead of everything I was feeling and thinking. I really wanted to go with him, but I was already planning my excuses not to go. I felt bad because I could feel him in my head, and I could feel I could not deceive this being in any way or in any thought. It was just like they said on Earth. He was all-knowing, all-seeing, and you could feel it. But he seemed so very relaxed, very forgiving as well. I had many feelings while we just stood there looking at each other. Jesus then said to me, "You must decide if you're coming with us or would like to go back." It was then I realized the most amazing thing in my entire life. He was speaking directly into my head, and his lips never ever moved. I could feel it coming out of his head and into mine. My ears were never used when I communicated with him. It was simply amazing that I was communicating with this being in a telepathic conversation. It blew me away, and it made me feel so different and so special all at the same time. It seemed very natural to me for some strange reason, and I thought about why I couldn't do this in my old world. I could distinctly feel he knew what I was going to say before I even thought of saying it. I attempted to talk with Jesus telepathically, but my efforts were comical at best. My mouth always moved, sounds came out of it, but I had a good idea of the concept, which up to that point for me was something humans are not capable of doing. I still felt very much human. I just thought of good reasons why I didn't want to go with them, and why I preferred to go back, while being very respectful and trying not to hurt anyone's feelings. I was surprised when he said to me, "I knew you would make that decision." He didn't make any further comments. He just nodded his head in agreement and smiled at me. I instinctive just floated there waiting to be sent back. Jesus spoke to me again in my head, not through my ears. He said, "I have work to do through you one day." I thought back to him, "Anytime, I will do anything you ask." He said, "You will have a long life." I thought back, "Thank you." As he turned away again, I noticed he didn't seem to touch the ground. Boom, there I was, back in the water with Richard and Ricky so close, with these looks of extreme fear in their faces. That gave me the chance to rip their regulators out of their mouths, and breath and breath and breath. We then began to all share the air and start upward to the surface. Once on the beach, I just lay there, blown away by what had happened, in total disbelief of what I had just experienced. Very emotionally moved, yet calm, and feeling pretty lucky that I was back in this world. I asked Richard and Ricky what had happened, and they told me. They had turned around to come back for me since I had fallen behind them a little too far. Once they came back to me, they said I started to change colors. I went from a light brown to a blue, then a deep blue, and then a dull gray. I just floated there in the water, while I was this pale, gray, lifeless person. They told me they were afraid to touch me or move me. They said that after what appeared to be 5 to 10 minutes, at least to them, they noticed that my colors began to change again. They said I went from pale gray back to dark blue, and then pale blue, and then I was light brown again. They looked petrified with fear when I looked into their masks. That is when I seized their regulators. Once on the beach, both of them kept demanding an explanation from me. They could sense something had happened to me, but I wasn't in the mood to talk about it because I couldn't believe it myself. I was trying to figure it out, and I wasn't doing very well with it. I asked Richard to drive us home. We had come in my car that day. We usually dove early, so we had the rest of the day when we were done. We returned the diving equipment we rented, and we were soon on the freeway. Once again, the questioning started. What happened to you? Something happened to you. Tell us what happened to you. I could barely sit up in the front passenger seat. I felt weak and tired. I felt very strange. I finally told Richard and Ricky that something did happen to me, but that I wasn't really sure how to explain it to them. I told them they wouldn't believe me if I told them what had happened.